Right. I will make a start with introductions. So for those of you that haven't met me before, I'm Sarah. I'm one of the owners of Lawrence Dean Recruitment. I'm really excited about today's webinars. We've done a number of different webinars over the last few months, but this one I think is really current, and I'm hoping it will add a lot of value to everybody. Shortly, I'm going to go ahead and get you to be introduced to Gary, Angela and Helen, who are kindly joining us today. They're going to be really talking about today's session. To start off with, so this session is interactive. We're really talking about shared experiences, asking and offering advice, but we've got a few polls that we're going to go through, but I want it to be as interactive as possible. So if you've got any questions you want to ask as we go through, if you can use the Q&A function down the bottom, and I'll pause and sort of add those into the relevant sections as we're going through. But yeah, please do ask. There's no such thing as a silly question with this. It's interactive, it's confidential. Please just feel free to ask anything that you think is relevant. After today's session, Gary has kindly sent me a checklist that you can use with employees and actually help your employees use to kind of manage their own mental health. So I'll send that around in an email afterwards, which I think will be quite useful. So to start off today's session, if I can go over to you, Gary, just to introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm Gary Johannes. I'm the co-founder of a company called Mental Health in the Workplace. And we work mostly with corporates who want to recognise that they can get the very best out for their organisation by getting the very best from their employees, and that's by first working with their employees' well-being, because when somebody's feeling at their best and being the best version of themselves, they can contribute the most of themselves, both home and at work. And that stems from being a mental health practitioner, have been for 10 years, and also I'm a lecturer. And I spend most of my life lecturing around the country nearly every weekend. So everything I do is around getting the very best out of individuals and getting the very best out of organisations when it comes to terms of mental health. So that's what I do, and I do a lot around neuroscience.
Awesome.
So that's me, really.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Angela, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Outlook just decided to do an update on me, so hopefully my connection hasn't suddenly become all jarred and pixelated. But thank you for organising today, Sarah. I'm Angela Holland, and I'm a senior HR leader at Pitney Bowes. I've been at PB for 13 years now and have held roles in Sodexo and Thompson Holidays previously. I'm really passionate about employee experience holistically, including mental health and well-being. And I guess that's why I'm here today, really, to talk about the learned experiences from a practical and commercial sense of, how that can really be something to focus on.
Perfect, thank you. And Helen, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Lovely to virtually see you all today, and thanks, Sarah, for inviting me along. So I am the former CEO of a small business in Hertfordshire called Affinity for Business, and we were an award-winning organisation that particularly focused on being a great place to work. And there's nothing new about that, but where we took that focus really started to be around mental health. That was very personal to me because of my own mental health trials and tribulations pretty much throughout my life since I was a teenager, really. So quite selfishly wanting to create a place to work that I could thrive in. And it sort of grew and grew across our business into something that really drove a fantastic commercial organisation to be very successful, with everybody within it valued and healthy and all of those things. Now, none of that was easy, and a lot of it was, the challenges were things we hadn't come across before, so we learned along the way the sorts of things that worked, the sorts of things that definitely didn't work, and the fact that it is a pretty much permanent process. You're never done with it, because there's always something. And so I'm really happy to share today insight from that, and particularly in the context of what we titled this webinar around, the positive impacts of the pandemic on mental health. I've had a few people message me saying, I'm really intrigued about that name, the title of the thing. I want to hear what you've got to say. So, it's a different way of looking at it, which is actually a technique for reframing that helps with good mental health and resilience, by the way. And the final thing to say, I'm currently director on 2 boards of very different organisations that are approaching this from a number of different ways, one of which is a large housing association, and the other of which is actually a workplace mental health provider called Better Space. So I'm going to touch on some things from those contexts as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. So let's start off on that then, because we called it the positive impact of COVID-19 on mental health, which is quite controversial because there's been a lot of negative around it. But I suppose from your perspective, if we start off with you, Angela, what do you think COVID-19 has kind of done for mental health from a positive angle?
From my standpoint, the real shift I've seen is the discussion, the emphasis and the focus on actually let's talk about mental health and wellness. Previously, I think, employers have spoken about mental wellness. It's been on the agenda, but it's been one of those, I think, that probably has been taken incorrectly, less seriously. And now with COVID, the real focus on actually this is an endurance test. We need to make sure our employees' health and well-being is tip-top, essentially, to keep our business running. And all of those external factors that are going on outside of life, other than work, have just increased through the roof. So for me, it's the focus and the energy and the impetus now behind mental wellness in the workplace.
What about you, Gary? Anything to add on that? Anything that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I would have said, except what I would add from a therapeutic point of view. So I look after between 150 and 200 therapists on a supervisory role, so they report into me and talk to me a lot. And what we've seen, particularly in the last 8-12 weeks, is people who are who probably wouldn't have come to them in the past and now going, do you know what, I've just realised how stressful my job is now. I've got to go back, and how challenged it is. Now I've had time out. I now know, I've got an understanding of how I felt there, because we've had a real big, black and white look at, how work feels. And people are actually going, actually, I need to have a conversation, or I need to actually put my hand up and go and get help to go back into the workplace. I'm not saying I don't want to go back, some are, but actually employers are now being told, getting, as Angela said, realization that actually they can't go back to where they were. Things have changed. There's been a line drawn in the sand, and everybody, if they're going to move forward, employers and employees have got to take action now. And I think, I'm definitely seeing at the coalface lots more people taking action than they've ever done before. And I think that's a really positive thing, because it's no longer, as Angela said, right down on the agenda. It's moved really close to the top, as part of the business survival for everybody.
Yeah, I would agree. What about you, Helen? Anything different to add to that?
Yeah, I guess the other aspect that I found really interesting and challenging, and I think is incredibly important, is how the intersections have started to be really emphasised. So when I think back to what we were doing on mental health in AFB, sort of starting in autumn of 2016 is when we really started. Gosh, 4 years ago, I've just realised. Time flies. We were looking very much from the point of view of stress. We were looking from the point of view of stigma. We were looking at how to make the workplace somewhere that enhanced your mental well-being, didn't undermine it. All of those really good things, right? Those are brilliant things. What I think has changed in the last 6 months is people's recognition that there are all sorts of things that affect your mental health, and actually COVID has exacerbated that. So there's an intersection with race. There's, for people who are not in a position of white privilege, the last 6 months on a whole load of levels has been an extremely stressful world. Gender, the impact on women, particularly women who are carers, whether that's carers of older relatives or children, disproportionate levels of stress placed on women, often with no bad intent around around that, but it's the way it's worked out. And there's been a lot written about the kind of turning back of the clock for women, and also what that means in future. And employers have got to really, really think about that. There's an age aspect to this. If you've been told to shield because of your age, but actually you're incredibly, fit and healthy in normal life, how does it feel to be so isolated just because you happen to be over 70? Or indeed, if you're a student, right? And then there's the class question. It's been really easy for me to be at home in my 4-bedroom house on the edge of countryside with walks and fresh air on the doorstep. Actually, what would it have been like for me with my family if we'd been in a city, in a flat with no outside space? That's a very simplistic take on it. But all of these things are, mental health doesn't stand in isolation of that context and those intersections. And I think in the past, employers have probably thought quite one-dimensionally about it. And I think the good thing about, as Angela and Gary have touched on, the awareness raising and the conversations that are starting to have, and people starting to really think about this stuff, is it's bringing into focus those other aspects as well.
Just to build on that point, Sarah, if I may, and that Helen's just made, it's really that intersectionality and the impact this has had is so vast and so important. And from a HR standpoint, actually facilitating that dialogue and holding that space to talk about the impact across those groups. I mean, for me personally, being in my role, it's given me an opportunity to share exactly what Helen said. Actually, we marked up the external environment and the types of segments of society that we have, and said what impact has COVID had on these parts of society, and what can we do? What do we need to think about to positively influence outcomes in these spaces? And I don't think without COVID we would have been able to hold that space with such gravitas and such impact. And I think that's a real shift forward. So it's a good point to make, Helen.
I think really I've noticed, and again, we've talked about this before, I feel like quite a novice on this subject matter. It's something that I'm aware of, but haven't been involved in a huge amount of detail. I think the one thing that I see socially and professionally is it's something people now talk about. There's, for whatever reason, there has always been a bit of a stigma around mental health, like it's a bit of a taboo subject. It shouldn't be talked about, which I think sometimes is part of the problem. And I suppose what I've seen, on a personal and professional level, is people actually more comfortable talking about their feelings, their versions around that and what they're struggling with, which actually, if anything positive comes out of it, it's got to be that, surely, that actually people are starting to get comfortable actually talking about that big taboo subject that, rewind 6 months ago, like you said, Angela, it was on the agenda, people were talking about it a bit, but actually how seriously did companies take it? How important was it really into what they did?
And just to build on that, Sarah, from my standpoint, sorry, Gary, I didn't hear you talking, I cut over you. From my standpoint, we ran some specific mental wellness sessions, and I was overwhelmed at the volume of attendances and also how participative people were. We went with an organisation who were very focused on discussion-based interaction, so it wasn't PowerPoint heavy, it was a space that we could come and talk about experiences. And we segmented the way that we interacted with our employee base, based on furlough, non-furlough, parents, carers, managers and working staff. But we had over 300 individual attendances from a population of circa 450 in the UK. So we was overwhelmed really, and people actually willing to come to meet with us and talk about these things. And what it really emphasised for me is actually we're further apart than we've ever been, but actually we feel closer than we've ever been using technology. And that's been really impactful from my standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things going on from Sarah's point, and then Angela, you sort of think taking it a bit further, I think you saying you're a novice, Sarah, is one of the things I'd like to actually change in people, because they've got this understanding that we all have to be experts. And I guess I'm an expert, but actually anybody can have a conversation, and dialogue is the driving force of changing stigma. And I think what COVID's done, which Angela just made a point of, and you made a point of really well, Sarah, was people have almost got an excuse to actually now talk about it. They've got something to go, because of COVID, I can admit this, where before I didn't really get, otherwise it would have been work or family, and I don't want to share that stuff. But COVID can take the blame. And COVID has definitely made it worse, but a lot of this stuff was there before. We didn't know how to articulate it, or whether it was safe to, or will I be judged? And now we can go, this is happening because, and it's made worse by COVID. And that's great in a positive sense. I mean, nobody wants COVID or have it, have had it been here. But actually, if we look at the positive, it started so much dialogue. And you don't have to be an expert. We need to get rid of that whole idea that you need an expert. It's just starting a conversation, because then you can climb up the ladder to the service or support you need, because you can identify it. But if nobody talks about it, nobody gets out there, nobody has that chat while they're having a cup of coffee going, do you know what, I'm really suffering with this. And whether that's over Zoom or whether it's, 2 meters distance in the coffee room, that still will be a start, which we've never had before.
True.
You know.
So what I'd like to do first of all, if it's okay with everybody, is I'm just going to do a quick poll. Just want to ask you, basically, do you feel prepared? Sorry, start off again. Bear with me. Love technology this morning. Right. Do you think that your organisation consistently supports your employees' mental health? It's completely confidential. I'll share the results, but it doesn't tell me who said what. I'm just interested to know, do you feel that your organisation, its consistency is probably the key word there. Does it support your employees' mental health? Just take a couple of seconds for everyone to have a chance to complete some interesting stuff there. Okay, perfect. Right. So, hoping you can all see that on your screens now. But basically, so for 50% of people are saying most of the time. It's good that we've got 20% confidently saying yes. But everyone else has got sometimes a no. So there's still a bit of work to go there, I guess. Moving on then, what I'd be quite keen to sort of ask everybody is, in your experiences, having a good mental health strategy and culture in your business is obviously really important now more than ever. And probably now, regardless of where people are based, there needs to be a strategy in place that means it's consistent across the board. What would you say, if I start off with you, Helen, in your experience, what are some of your top tips that you could share with people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the headline for me is one size doesn't fit all. So you need to strike a balance between having some foundations to your strategy, and that should be about what do you want to achieve, what do you want it to be underpinning, and describing how you want your workplace to be for the people, humans work in it. And there's a human case for this and there's a business case. You can extend that into, and therefore our commercial success, therefore our customers, therefore the service we provide will be X, Y, or Z. So I would encourage thinking in both dimensions of the human case and the business case, but you need that underpinning purpose, if you like. Then I would say avoid the temptation to think that one thing is going to fix everything, and that the things that you do will be suitable for everyone. And this is the biggest single thing I learned was that whilst it's really important to have in place policies and processes and systems that support your staff consistently and fairly, so that everybody can access the support, everybody can be confident that there is sufficient support there. The point at which you start to think, oh, and now I'm going to, everybody gets, I don't know, a subsidized gym membership or a subsidized access to a particular, to Headspace or something. You may well find, we found that blanket stuff like that only suits some people. And even the people it suits don't necessarily engage particularly strongly with it. And so looking for ways to provide a very personal and individual approach is really, really worthwhile. I'm going to declare an interest. The board that I sit on, Better Space, that is a service that is very much tailored and personalised. I'm not going to bang on about it, but the point is, mental health we all have mental health, right? And it's a very personal thing. My problem with sleep is not the same as your problem with sleep. Mine might be that I cannot drop off. Yours might be that you drop off, but you wake up in the middle of the night and can't go back to sleep. The answer for both of us probably isn't the same, because the reasons why we struggle to sleep may be wildly different. And so the lesson for me is, your staff are all individual human beings with different needs. Being clear on what you are trying to achieve is really, really important, and then being flexible in the way you go about doing that so that you can address the widest possible group of people in your business, ideally everybody. And I think this point about making both the human case and the business case, because the danger is, what we've said about talking, the conversation is really, really important, the openness, the people telling their stories, but you have to go beyond talking. Because talking runs out of steam. And what you need to then do is take the environment you've created through having open and honest conversations and turn it into a place where stuff changes, stuff improves, things happen, people get benefit. Otherwise, you find yourself having the same conversations a year later and thinking, why doesn't it feel any better than it did? You know?
Real cultural.
There you go. You did ask.
One of the analogies that I heard, which resonates with that point you made, Helen, about everyone's experience is so different. And I have to try and say it right. I didn't make it up, so I can't proclaim that it's mine. But somebody described to me that COVID, everybody's in the same sea, but in completely different boats.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me. Actually, everyone's experience is so unique. COVID, and notwithstanding COVID, prior to COVID, like you mentioned, Gary, this has always been there. It's just actually it's come to the fore right now. And that analogy really helps, and I think really resonates with team members as well around different experiences. And to your point, Helen, so we use a completely multifaceted approach, giving people different options to interact in different ways. Not everyone will like to come to a call in a discussion-based forum and share their experiences, because that's not the way that they're built. It's not the way that they're designed. I mean, we've deployed mental health first aid, we've had financial wellness sessions, we've used our EAP service, we've got the Thrive mental health app. We've tried lots of different things, but I think one key thing that it always comes back to, Helen, to your point, is culture, leadership, and how that's really integrated in the way that we do things here, rather than it just being something on the side and the periphery. Really important.
What about you? What kind of advice and tips could you give for people?
So was that to me?
Yes, sorry, Gary, yeah.
Sorry. Well, the thing is, we, similar to Helen, I run a mental health training company, so we go into corporates, but we won't work with an organisation who doesn't get the value of the human. So we've turned businesses down that we won't go in and deliver work with them, because you've got to put everybody at the front of this, not the business. The business will be impacted massively positively if they get the people right and look after the people. So one of the points made was the culture, and everything we do is about culture. And if you create this process as, we're doing this, and then you look and none of the senior managements are paying attention to it, employees will just go, okay, so it's not real. Yeah. And they won't buy into it. But when you get a CEO being very open about their mental health crisis over the years, and you get the directors absolutely doing it, and they get it, and so it filters down and up. So it's no longer upwards, it's no longer downwards, it's right across the board. And when you get a company doing that, it massively impacts everybody, because we all need leaders. Every single one of us in the world needs somebody to, see that, well, they're a peer leader, they're a role model, and we've got to do that. And if I'm talking to the accountancy side, you can see that Deloitte have done loads of work around how much mental health training is worth. But actually, what most of them don't get is you've got to educate people to understand what mental health is. Loads of people, I was watching the Freddie Flintoff thing the other night, and it was amazing. But every time mental health was mentioned, that he might have a mental health issue, you could see the fear on his face that he's being put in the category of having a mental health issue. He clearly has, but he didn't like it. And he kept saying, but as a man, I should be able to cope. And that's, the culture of sport, the culture of a lot of big business, and certainly if you're moving up the ranks of management, you can't have any weakness. So we've got to change that. And actually, people with vulnerabilities around mental health generally end up far more successful if they just own up to it and be who they want to be. So ours is about education. And then if you educate people well what it is and who they are and how they feel, they can make the choices about what they need. And everybody does need something different. But if they don't know what's causing it for them, where it lies, what is their thing around mental health, and take some responsibility for their own mental health, I believe that everybody, it's an internal job. Everybody needs to take some level of responsibility. Then they can step up and go, actually, I need to go and offload, or I need to have this sort of situation or that situation, and they can then move forward. So us, it's all about getting good quality education around mental health and what it is and how you can take ownership of your own mental health. And that drives the culture.
I think language is really important to that as well, though. And, people will use language they feel comfortable using. And I think it's important as leaders that we role model how to articulate that, and we are human. I was on a call just yesterday, and I was saying about how we had a kickoff in February, and I was presenting at the kickoff. And I was happy to do it. I was comfortable doing it. It went really well. But prior to it, I was nervous. And actually, I've never heard anyone in our organisation actually say, I feel really nervous about that. So I made it an active point. People saying, oh God, how are you feeling about presenting? Do you know what? I actually feel quite nervous about it. And I just think people just need to, before you go into the whole realms of a mental health problem, the stigma associated with that, even just talking about how we feel as humans, it's got to start at that point on the journey as well, and the language that we're comfortable with using, rather than sort of just making this big thing that's unmanageable.
What do you think then? So obviously your background's all very different and very broad. Helen, if I start with you, if you were to sort of share your experiences of, so it's one thing that you've done in your career specifically around mental health that you think actually that was really successful, and yeah, you're quite comfortable to share, what, like an initiative or something you did that you thought, wow, yeah, that was brilliant.
The single most effective thing I did was tell my story.
Okay.
Simple as that. And so roll back to 4 years ago, pretty much now, and our business was, I'd only joined Affinity Water in the May, and we had this deadline of a new market opening in the following March, the end of March 2017, and the time had been lost, suffice to say, and so the team we were running to stand still at times, and we had a period from October 2016 to the end of March 2017 where we basically had that 6 months to get stuff right, and I could see the stress and the pressure in the business. And bearing in mind, I left BT in 2015 thoroughly burnt out, and I'd had at least one, if not two, previous serious burnouts. Could not get out of bed, couldn't wash, couldn't face the day, couldn't talk to people, scared of my BlackBerry, used to lock it in a cupboard so I couldn't see the alerts. That's not normal. So I was seeing the signs in other people, and I was seeing the signs in myself, and it was Stress Awareness Week or something, #something, right? So I thought, okay, I got in touch with, I saw a tweet or something on LinkedIn from Mind, and there was this resource pack of nothing complicated, a poster and some instructions for people to share their stress coping mechanisms, and that this is a powerful thing to do. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a powerful thing to do. And I thought, but the thing is, it needs to be okay to talk about this stuff. There needs to be permission for everybody not to trivialize it, and not to be kind of like, oh, I don't get stressed, grr, I'm really tough. And so I told my story, and I wrote it in an email, and I sent it to all my staff. And I told them the story of me from age 15 being bulimic. And you're right, Gary, it's mental ill health. It's nothing other than that. And all my trials and tribulations through separation and divorce, and being a single parent, and discovering I wasn't bulletproof at work, and all of that stuff, and the way it affects you physically as well as mentally. And I told my story, and I told it in the third person until the last sentence, and I said that all of those people, so I described them as different people through stages in life, and at the end I said, by the way, that was me. And so the point of this email is to let you know it's okay not to be okay. And you can hear in my voice, it gets me still thinking about it, because what that did was terrify me, but at the same time make me feel so much better about being myself and who I am. But it also led so many of my lovely humans that I worked with to come and say to me, thank you. I didn't know directors did that. I didn't know senior people. It's to your point, Angela, nobody gets nervous, do they? You look at these superhumans, they can leap tall buildings with a single bound, and you think, well, I'm never going to be like that, so maybe I don't get to be a CEO or a chief people officer or whatever else, because I'm not that brilliant. And what you never hear, or you never used to, is all of the stuff going on for those human beings. And you never get that reassurance that they don't know what they're doing either. or they, and so, sorry, this is a bit of a ramble. The single most useful thing I did was tell that story, because then subsequently the whole journey we went on was legitimate, because it wasn't me being paternalistic and saying, they're there, you know, the people who work for me who might be weak and feeble, you need this stuff, I don't, you know, there was none of that. It was just, we're in this together. And you know, and it's okay not to be okay. And I won't talk about it now. I think it's important we touch on, in the context of running a business, how you align performance management with that kind of environment where you're getting to know people on a different level, and you're knowing and understanding their trials and tribulations, because that is a challenge.
Okay, brilliant.
That's
Thank you for sharing that, Helen. That was really personal, and I can talk, being open. I mean, doing this webinar is the first time Helen and I have actually spoken, but I know of you, the connections that I know that have worked for you, and even, I don't know if anyone, you know, is active on LinkedIn, but you can really tell the culture that AFB has. You know, I didn't work with you as a business, but the you know, people genuinely sorry to leave such a great place. So I do think all of the stuff you've done worked incredibly well. I've never known so many people to consistently be disappointed that was over, and that's a real credit. So thank you for sharing and being so honest. Angela, did you have anything to add? If you know, in your experience, one thing that you did that really stood out to being a big achievement and went well?
Helen really epitomised it, actually. Humanising the experience is what I would have said in every aspect of employment, to be honest. Whether it's, you know, maternity leave and the way that you write to people, the tone of voice that you use, sending a congratulations card that's handwritten and personal. You know, those simple things really make a difference. Let people know that they are humans. They're not just employees. They are real people with all different experiences and different emotions. So, you know, Helen articulated it far better than me, but it was humanising the experience was one thing that I think has a huge impact, and I'd recommend doing.
Gary, I know your angle is slightly different from a training perspective, but was there any, whether it's a specific course or a specific situation you came in and trained people around that actually had a really big impact?
Yeah, so I've got an interesting story in that, because I don't think I have any big story like Helen. That's what I always believe. But I was one of those bulletproof people. I'm an ex-serviceman. I was in the RAF, and then I come into sales, and then I used to own nightclubs and bars and that. And I was like, yeah, nobody's going to, you know, all these people whinging and whining, get over yourself. And I was like that. And then the industry blew up, and, you know, I ended up shutting all my business, losing a lot of money, and went bust. And then I retrained myself, and I ended up working with who now my business partner. And I'm like, you know, I'm going to get caught out. I've already failed and that. And she said, no. I never knew I had, you know, anything going on. And I ended up going on a hypnotherapy course to learn hypnotherapy, just so I had a team of 900 I used to look after. And I was like, they're going to catch me out because I've already failed at this big time. And I went on a course to learn the language and be better at what I did for them. And then halfway through the course, I realized, actually 45 years at that point, I'm a bit older now, that I'd been always wearing this big shield, this big coat of invincibility. I come from the tough streets of South London. You don't show any vulnerability, you know. And I'd been play acting this role for 45 years. And then halfway through this course, I realised that actually everything I've ever done was about helping people, and I've been denying it. I've been doing it in a, I'll help you because you need help. I'm never going to say I'm helping anyone. And I realised then that actually this is what I should always be doing. I should be helping people become the best version of themselves. It's who I am, but my history, where I come from, the culture I grew up in, then being a serviceman, then owning clubs and nightclubs and things like that, I was never allowed to be me. And I was 45 before I become the real version of me. And at that point, when I accepted, you know what, this is what I should do. I don't have to climb that ladder. I don't have to impress that person. I don't have to pretend that I'm rough and this and that. Actually, I'm a really nice guy. Well, sometimes I'm nice. And now when I train people, I'm honest in my training. It's real common sense. It's real fact. And I've now got qualifications in neuroscience. I left school at 13 because we couldn't afford to go to put shoes on my feet to go to school. So I left school at 13. So I was always one of those people who was always in the wrong place because I shouldn't be here. But actually, when I realized why I was here and what my job was, I then was able to help everybody else. And that's probably the thing, owning up to who I really am. I have got weakness. I am vulnerable. I am nice. I don't have to go around pretending I'm something I'm not. for me, that's the biggest thing. Just going, do you know what? Why am I really here? What do I want to do? What pleases me? What am I best at, without trying to be something else?
Trying to be someone else.
That made a massive difference. Just owning up.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks. Okay, cool. I'm going to do another poll now. She says, hopefully. Right. So if I can just ask everybody. So obviously we've talked about some of the positive things that COVID-19 has done for mental health. Equally, I'm conscious it hasn't all been rosy. So what percentage increase have you seen in mental health issues due to the impact of COVID-19? And that should be coming up. Coming up now. Wow, some really interesting results there, actually. Just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, let me end that one. So basically huge in a roundabout way. And it may be for some of the factors that we've talked about already, that, it's already been something that's there, but actually it's making people talk about it more now. Or maybe not talking about actually getting COVID-19, but the situation that's put everyone in has just brought it at the forefront of people's mind a lot more. So yeah, huge increase there. So in terms of one thing I'd like to ask is, we've touched upon it when we've spoken before, but obviously a lot of companies have people in place that are, I say, responsible, but are accountable for mental health. So whether that is typically HR teams, or we've touched upon like the mental health first aiders in the businesses. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how you support those people, what you've done historically that has actually provided, because I'm conscious that's a big role for someone right now. And it may not be something, although they may have had training, may not be something they're massively confident with themselves, and they have their own mental health to think about. So what sort of stuff would you suggest that people do to support those people? I'll start with you, Angela, if that's okay.
Yeah, we're at the infancy, I guess, in our mental health first aider journey. So I can't really add any value on that aspect. Obviously, where I look at it, probably from, with notwithstanding sort of the mental health first aid stuff that I just mentioned, is managers. And managers, similar to you actually, Sarah, will often say, but I'm not an expert in mental health. And then my response would be, but we all have mental health. We're all humans. So, you can't say you don't understand it. Maybe you don't understand the realms of it and the different dynamics and all the different types of outcomes there can be, and things that people experience. And, to your point, Helen, there's a myriad of different things that can happen. For me, it's around those individuals also have their own unique needs. And it's through those experiences of discussion, really. What I tend to find is that I'll have a manager supporting an employee who will come and then talk to me about their own mental health experiences, which they wouldn't have shared with me otherwise. So it's really holding that safe space for them to be able to talk to you, and it tends then to shift from the individual to their own personal experience. So that door's almost been opened and facilitated. So it's just creating that space where they can share, and other vehicles like we're implementing the mental health first aiders program to help them understand where the boundaries are. Like physical first aid, you're not a doctor. You're there just to provide some, crisis support in some circumstances and guide people to appropriate support avenues that there are. And also knowing that, we own our own mental health. Yes, we can impact other people's mental wellness. At the same time, we're responsible for ourselves, as our employees are responsible for themselves as well. So I don't think I directly answered your question necessarily. No, yeah. There's so many different factors there that kind of all need to roll up together.
I think that's one of the key things I've learned from some on a personal level, and I don't mind sharing, is actually being accountable for your own mental health and making sure you can help and support your employees, but remembering it's not down to you to fix it for them. I think that's, I, like you said, Gary, I've been around for a while now. I've had different versions of myself over the years, but, ultimately I'm a nice person, and I see someone upset and struggling, and my instant response is I want to help them. And I think realizing that you help and support maybe a slightly different in this kind of situation, and how you get the best out of people and can support them, but without trying to fix them. That's something that really stood out to me.
Sorry, just to build on that, the other component I think as well is that you don't necessarily know what support the other individual's getting as well. So you trying to fix something could actually be detrimental to the support plan that they've already got.
Yeah, I mean, I think to pick up on this is something we really we really learned, and I think I might have written a LinkedIn article about it, so maybe I'll reshare that, because this, for me, supporting the people who provide the support is incredibly important, and it's the gap around mental health first aid that you have to fill in yourself, and I'm shouting from the rooftops about this. Don't just train a bunch of mental health first aiders and then think that's done. What you and also, by the way, people who volunteer to become mental health first aiders might not be the best people to become mental health first aiders, because it may end up really triggering for them if they have their own mental health challenges. So we put in place our mental health first aid team at AFB. Was a support group for themselves. I was part of that support group, so was my HR team. We used to meet regularly, we would check in, because, for example, there were things that came up that were HR related, right? There were things that came up to do with employees, colleagues struggling to get on with each other, for example. That's not for a mental health first aid to try and figure out whose side they're on in a disagreement within the workplace, right? Equally, they're not fixing people. The most important thing about mental health in the workplace from that perspective is safety and signposting. So and there's a very good course that Mind used to run, that I presume they still run virtually, which is mental health training for managers. It's a day's course, I think. We had a really great woman called Tanya Diggory come and do that with us. And again, it was support and signposting. It was how to have the conversations, but also it's practical things like if a member of staff who has opened up to you then gets in touch out of hours, what do you do? Well, first of all, you make sure they're not on their own. If you're concerned about their safety, you address that. You don't then try and have a counselling session with them. You don't tell them your opinion about antidepressants. You keep, that's not your job. And so the stuff around supporting the people who provide the support is very important. The boundaries are really important. The education and the training is really important. And I think the continuing the conversation about it, so that you can learn from what you're doing, you can learn what works, and so on, is key. And I think the problem I have with some of the stuff that's out there, and we talked about this when we were meeting last week, and Gary, I know you've got strong views on this too, which I thoroughly share, is you can't compartmentalize stuff. You have to take a broad and holistic approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do have strong views on it. I think mental health first aid, I deliver mental health first aid training, and I think it's a great resource, but it's something which needs to be managed and looked after, because you're absolutely right. I train so many people who have had mental health issues and they want to be supporting other people because they know how it feels, but then they haven't got the resilience to cope with somebody who's then got a mental health issue. Just they might have the now some extra knowledge, but they haven't got the resilience to cope when somebody says this, that, or the other, because it, like you say, it triggers or brings back or creates issues for them. And then you get people who are a little bit overzealous in their support, which isn't helpful either all the time. But I think the biggest issue is what you both mentioned, is there's no support for the supporter. And one of the things I would absolutely suggest is having peer groups, like you've said, and have regular meetings in the organisations. And I've struggled with this with some organisations who are willing to give an hour a fortnight where the mental health first aiders can meet up for a general session just to get to know each other, so they can offload to each other, so they can be their own mental health first aiders without, dynamics. And another thing which I find mental health first aid lacks is confidentiality. So if somebody comes to me and says, this is the way I feel, that's their personal information. Can I share it? And most organisations don't have a process, because if they tell HR, have they breached that? Is that now going to go on their permanent record? For a better word, I'm not HR. But then if the HR person leaves and they've got somebody but they haven't shared it, or the first aider leaves who's supporting that person but they haven't been able to share it, who looks after that person? Because it's too compartmentalised, they can't share it, it's confidential. So they need a better process where the first aider feels confident that they've got a process and support backup. And most of the organisations I've come across don't have that. They've ticked the box, they've got their first aiders, and they've done everything what the HSE says they should. So it's about creating nice support mechanisms for those first aiders so they can feel confident, and possibly more support than most organisations do. But all they can do is be a really good ear, make sure the person feels supported and comforted and safe, and the first aider feels safe. And if you can do that and then signpost them, and most first aiders go away, we've done the course. What they should be doing, and the organisation should be going, like, you know, organisations like Better Space and people like that, you know, have a whole ream of support things. If somebody comes with this, you just go to this space. We've got a place for their first aiders. They can go and find, you know, whatever support materials, support they need, and signpost materials where they can signpost people. Because if you say to the average person who's working really hard, you've got to go and find all this support material, when are they going to fit that in? So the organisation should be, I know you're a first aider, we've got all this stuff for you, so if you need it, you can signpost appropriately.
So true. You don't expect the physical first aider to pop to Boots and buy the bandage. You have a box of stuff that they can use, and you make sure it works.
I'm going to nick that. Can I nick that? Because I've never
have it.
Brilliant.
That's my gift to you.
Yeah. That's the perfect way of explaining it. But most organisations say, "Oh, we've done the course. Go and find something online about where you can point someone," and they haven't got time. They're working hard themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks, guys. Right, one more poll. I just want to ask more about the future, I suppose, more than anything. So for everybody on the webinar today, do you feel prepared, and have you got a strategy in place to navigate, I suppose, what the next wave of uncertainty might happen over the next 6 months? We've been on a great roller coaster over the past 6 months of this since COVID, but I'm just curious to know who actually feels prepared and ready for what the next 6 months may and could bring. Just leave that up for a couple of seconds. Okay. So, understandably, but also slightly alarmingly, no one feels.
Yes.
Some people are dipping their toe in and they feel slightly prepared, but on the whole, and do you know what? I on a personal level completely understand that. Who knows what the next 6 months will sort of will bring? But I suppose from my point of view, I'd be interested to know what challenges, I suppose, specifically around mental health, and what challenges you think people, or not so much challenges, what things you think people should be aware of the next 6 months. In your opinion, what will be the next wave of things that people could get ahead of the curve and get ready for? Helen, have you got any specific ideas?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big one. I think now is the time, if you haven't already been doing it, to be really working through what your strategy is around where work happens. So yeah, I get that it's uncertain. I get that it is deeply unhelpful to be told people ought to be back at work. Oh no, they shouldn't. Oh yes, they should. All that stuff. Try and block that out and think about your own, your business, what it does, where that work needs to happen, your customers, where they are, where those interactions need to happen. And I mean, it was stunning and amazing how well the vast majority of organizations that could pivot did pivot in March, April. You know, some stuff just cannot be done online, but that was really brilliant. I feel like this now is about being intentional around where work happens, because the uncertainty of where am I going to need to be, how am I going to get there, is it safe, you know, what will this now do to my life, whether it's my caring responsibilities, whether it's you know, all sorts of stuff. Your staff will be worrying about it, and if they're not, it's because they're maybe a little bit head in the sand. If you're in the incredibly fortunate position where nothing's really changed apart from volume of work, then great. But the vast majority of organizations, where does work happen and how do you make that work well is really important. And the reason I pick that is I think a lot of other stuff flows from it. You know, it's going to inform your strategy around what do you do about if you decide, for example, that, you know, a la Google, nobody needs to come into the office pretty much ever again.
Yeah.
Marvelous. What about your members of staff who are in a flat share, who have no space to work in, or who've got little children who are in and out of school like yo-yos because of staff availability or whatever else? It's all well and good for those of us that have a home office and a nice view and a comfy chair. What are we going to do about the humans that don't have the same situation? And I think that is really important, because if you can give people a sense of some sort of certainty that they can then anchor to, and I'm gesticulating because I always wave my hands around. You know, they've got the part of the problem with the Corona coaster is there's no anchor. There's fear, there's uncertainty, there's all of this stuff, you know, and there's overwhelm. And I think organizations can do themselves and their staff a favor by creating an anchor around what work is going to happen and where it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And from there, you can then start to think about, well, how will that then impact people's well-being more broadly, within which well-being, mental health sits. And you can start to get to those other questions bit from beyond there. But getting that bit right, I think, is incredibly important. And an opportunity.
I completely agree, but I'm going to come from a slightly different angle, but say the same thing, because I'm not going to tell people what to do, really. It's all about, for me, prevention, and exactly what Helen just said, getting those things. So if we look at what causes us stress and mental health issues, the general thing is uncertainty. And people talk about being positive all the time. I see a lot of people who are very positive for their depression. What positivity really means, it doesn't mean happiness, it doesn't mean go forward. Positive means certain. The definition of positivity is certainty. And the biggest thing that causes us stress in life is uncertainty, and we're really uncertain. So there's lots of things. I've got no control over the virus. I've got no control over workspace and this, that, and the other. But what do I have? What can I put in place? What I can be certain of? Because if I start negatively forecasting the future, which is what will happen if I look at, you know, the next 6 months without any anchors to, you know, to bind to, like Helen said, then I'll just create up stories. And our brains are designed to create the worst possible perspective so we can protect ourselves. So that's where a lot of stress and anxiety comes from, is our brain is designed to come up with the worst story so we can then start working out how to survive. If we go, well, okay, we've got no control over that. What have I got certainty about? I've got certainty about this. And build a picture of things you can control, and you are absolutely certain that that's fair and okay, and you have control. You will actually have less anxiety and stress about the other things. You'll be able to cope. You'll have more resilience. So for me, exactly what Helen says, work out what you can do, what you have control over, what you have certainty in. And it could be, I've got hot water, I've got, you know, I can still take the kids to school, or I can homeschool them. I've got internet access, I've got this, I've got that, I can do this, I can do. So rather than looking at what you can't do in the next 6 months, if this happens, if that happens, which we don't know, look at what you could do regardless of what happens. And that will reduce the amount of anxiety and stress you will suffer, therefore giving you more resilience to cope with whatever changes happen. But if you already predicted doom and gloom, you'll have no resilience when something simple changes and you have no control over it. So the science behind it is that.
And just to build on those points there, I was just conscious of time, so I won't dwell too much, but I think they're really important points. We need to let people get good at where they're working and let them start to thrive in that environment. The to-ing and fro-ing isn't healthy or good. The other thing that I would just add in is that the fear of the unknown, to your point, Gary. I think we would be remiss of us not to talk about other employment processes that are going to be happening during the latter part of this year and into next year for some organisations, thinking restructuring, thinking changes to jobs that might need to happen. Jobs might no longer exist in their current capacity. They might need to evolve into something different or operate differently. And I think it's how we handle those changes But then the follow on to that I would just build on is the risk of presenteeism associated with all of that. I'm so scared I'm going to lose my job. I'm so scared things are going to change. I'm working from home anyway, so I don't need to take any holiday. You know, people not actually taking adequate rest. And that whole myriad of presenteeism, I think, is a huge risk as resilience starts to peter out as this ongoing pandemic continues. So I just wanted to get that point in quickly, Sarah. I was just conscious of the time.
Really good. Thank you. Thanks, Angela. Right, we're kind of nearly at the end. So if anyone has any questions, if they want to put anything in the chat or the Q&A, not a question, but a comment. Somebody has anonymously put, Helen, basically, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was really moving, really inspirational, and it was very, very kind of you to share. So thank you.
My pleasure.
In terms of today, I hope people found it useful. There's one thing that's come up so far. Oh, someone wants to know how to keep in touch, so I can handle that after. We're all on LinkedIn, so if anyone, I will send around, like I said, an email with the attachment from Gary. I've had a look at it, and I'm going to use that with our team. It's really useful. But if anyone does want to connect with us, just use LinkedIn. That's where we all are. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone for being involved. I'm conscious you gave up your time today. I personally have found it really useful, and I hope everyone else has too. So yeah, thank you for giving up your time, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you for organising it, Sarah. Yeah. It's been so interesting, and I've learned from Gary and Angela in our conversations both today and previously, and you know what, it gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah,
that's my other thing. You know, we need our certainty, as Gary articulated so well, but I also need a little bit of hope.
Yes.
I find it very easy to feel hopeless. I have to ban myself from the news at times and from other sources of hopelessness. And I think that what we should take from all of this is there is hope on this front.
Yes.
You know, human beings, as the people that we all spend our time with, are coming to the fore a bit more, and I think that's a very hopeful thing.
And organisations are seeing that as well. That fact that 20% of people feel that they're ready, the organisations. If you go back a report from 2 years ago, that was less than 10%.
Yeah.
So the fact that already there's a groundswell of people feeling that their organisations are stepping forward, that's music to my ears, because everything I do is about trying to get that stigma changed and the process changed and the old-fashioned ways changed. And it's moving quicker than I could have pushed it on my own, definitely. And the whole, everybody's pushing in the right direction.
I think what's really exciting is if you go back to the title, I know it's been quiet now, Sarah, but if you go back to the title of the session, this whole discussion that we've had wouldn't have happened potentially without COVID. And I think that's why, you know, it's a bit of a roll of the dice as to how people feel about the title, but actually I think it has really projected, you know, this discussion. So fantastic.
Awesome, brilliant. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
That's a pleasure. Thanks to the audience as well for listening to us.
So have a great rest of the day. I'll end the call now. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.